Good morning. My name is Colin McDonald, Assistant Attorney General for the National Fraud Enforcement Division at the Department of Justice. I am joined today by U.S. Attorney Craig Missakian for the Northern District of California, U.S. Attorney Tim Corshane from the District of Arizona, First Assistant U.S. Attorney Segal Chattah from the District of Nevada, members of the Department of Justice's Healthcare Fraud Unit, and our law enforcement partners from FBI, DEA, and HHS OIG. Our message today and every day is simple. If you steal from the American taxpayer, the Department of Justice and our law enforcement partners will do everything possible to award you free housing in a federal prison. And we will not stop there. We will find the spoils of your fraud, take it from you, and give it back where it belongs, with the American people. No one should be allowed to rip off the United States of America, and we will not be shrugging our shoulders at those who do. Already this week, alongside our law enforcement partners, we executed over 20 search warrants in fraud investigations in Minnesota. We indicted a bookkeeper in Florida for siphoning $3.9 million from her employer. We secured a guilty plea from a former Iowa nonprofit director who stole money meant to help Americans find work. And we obtained a prison sentence for a tax cheat in Texas who withheld but did not pay his employees' taxes. And last week, among many other fraud enforcement actions, a judge sent a sex offender to prison for lying to receive SNAP benefits. We will continue to work around the clock to prosecute fraud. We are not doing this work alone. Under the leadership of President Trump, the entire apparatus of the federal government is laser focused on fraud as part of the President's task force to eliminate fraud, a whole of government effort chaired by Vice President Vance to eliminate fraud, waste, and abuse within the federal benefit programs. The task force is rapidly on the move, identifying fraudulent actors, strengthening our country's financial security protocols, and casting a clear vision that fraud against the American pocketbook will not be tolerated. On April the 7th, Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche issued a memorandum on the creation of the department's National Fraud Enforcement Division. In his memorandum, General Blanche directed the department to take immediate action to expand the National Fraud Enforcement Division into a robust litigating division capable of reaching any fraud, large or small, perpetrated against taxpayer dollars. And we are springing into action. Last week, the Fraud Division announced a historic $300 million grant program for state and local prosecutors to join the Department of Justice in our mission to combat fraud. We welcome all who share our concern for taxpayer dollars to join us in this mission. And I am pleased to announce today a major new Fraud Division initiative to combat healthcare fraud, the creation of the West Coast Healthcare Fraud Strike Force in Arizona, Nevada, and right here in the Northern District of California. The data shows that the need for this new strike force is urgent and undeniable. Healthcare fraud in these districts imposes an enormous and growing burden on American taxpayers as fraudsters exploit programs meant for the poor, needy, elderly, and disabled. Some of the most significant Medicaid, wound care, and digital health technology fraud cases have been prosecuted in these districts. This new regional strike force will be staffed by at least 10 prosecutors from the Fraud Division's Healthcare Fraud Section, who will be a force multiplier for these U.S. attorneys' offices to combat a healthcare fraud crisis that is robbing taxpayers and harming patients. Since the creation of the National Response Strike Force in 2020, healthcare fraud prosecutors from Washington, D.C. have been partnering with these U.S. attorneys' offices to prosecute cutting-edge cases on the West Coast. For instance, in Arizona just last year, we secured guilty pleas and sentences of 15 and a half and 14 years for 2 wound graft company owners stemming from a $1.2 billion wound graft scheme. We seized $126 million in assets, including cash, luxury vehicles, and gold bars, returning needed funds to the taxpayers. Separately, prosecutors have charged a $650 million Medicaid fraud scheme that exploited vulnerable substance abuse patients who did not receive the care that they needed. But partnering on cases from Washington, D.C. is not enough for the amount of healthcare fraud in these districts, and it's not enough for the vision that the National Fraud Enforcement Division is casting. We need more attorneys on the ground across the nation to combat this nationwide problem. That is why, only 22 days after the acting Attorney General announced the creation of the Fraud Division, we are expanding our footprint here. Today's new strike force builds on a proud tradition that stretches back almost 2 decades. Over that period, this program, now comprised of 9 strike forces operating in federal districts across the country, including the Central District of California, has charged more than 6,200 defendants who collectively billed federal healthcare programs and private insurers more than $45 billion. Our healthcare fraud strike force is a model that powerfully combines data analytics with traditional investigative techniques to produce rapid results. This new West Coast strike force carries that legacy forward with a sharper focus, expanded resources, cutting-edge data analytics, and the full weight of this department's commitment to protecting you, the American taxpayer. This strike force will operate in close collaboration with U.S. attorneys' offices, the FBI, HHS OIG, DEA, and our other law enforcement partners. We will use data analytics, cross-district regional coordination, and every available legal tool to identify, investigate, and prosecute these crimes with speed and efficiency. Let me be clear to anyone who is committing fraud in the healthcare industry in Arizona, Nevada, and California. This strike force is coming for you, whether you are committing fraud on the street, in a medical office, or in a boardroom. Healthcare fraud steals from American taxpayers, corrupts the integrity of the programs that the most vulnerable among us rely upon, and puts patients at risk. The Fraud Division will track emerging fraud trends and follow the data, and the data in our possession shines an inescapable light on those committing healthcare fraud. The creation of the Fraud Division marks a new chapter in this effort. Our ability to prosecute these crimes will grow even more sophisticated with each passing day, and we will not rest in pursuing justice on behalf of taxpayers and patients. Thank you all for being here, and I'll now turn the podium over to U.S. Attorney Craig Missakian.
Good morning. I'm Craig Missakian, the United States Attorney for the Northern District of California. I'd first like to begin by thanking AAG McDonald for his leadership in this very important area. I'd also like to welcome him and my colleagues, the U.S. Attorney from Arizona, Tim Corshane, the First Assistant U.S. Attorney from Nevada, Sigal Chadha. I'd like to welcome you all to the Northern District of California. I'd also like to welcome our law enforcement partners from the FBI, HHS, OIG, and DEA. I am very proud to stand shoulder to shoulder with each of you in this important battle fought in the name of the American taxpayer and the hardworking men and women of this country. The announcement today of a West Coast healthcare fraud strike force is good news for the millions of Americans who rely on the our federal health care programs, the money that funds these programs, our tax dollars that the government holds in trust for the American people, and the new strike force represents a renewed commitment to protecting those tax dollars by working every single day to root out fraud in this region's vital healthcare sector. And in that way, we ensure that the people that need care, that legitimately need care, will get the care that they need. The Northern District of California is home to Silicon Valley and the Bay Area. It is the world leader in innovation, not only in semiconductors, software, and AI, but also in healthcare technology and biotech. Because of the unique importance of the healthcare industry in this district, I have made protecting that innovation a top priority of this office. But innovation must be built on integrity, not on fraud. And this office has a long history of prosecuting complex, technology-centered healthcare fraud schemes that target investors, cheat federal healthcare programs, and ultimately harm patients. For example, the office and the healthcare fraud unit charged and convicted the founder of a Silicon Valley medical technology company who defrauded investors and engaged in a $77 million healthcare fraud scheme involving fraudulent claims for COVID-19 and allergy testing. He was sentenced to 8 years in prison. And this office's prosecution of Elizabeth Holmes resulted in a sentence of more than 11 years in prison for deceiving investors in her Silicon Valley startup Theranos, lying to healthcare partners and offering patients a blood test that was just too good to be true. And most recently, in partnership with the healthcare fraud unit, we charged and convicted the CEO and clinical president of a California digital health company for a $100 million scheme to illegally distribute Adderall over the internet. It was a first-of-its-kind prosecution that applied traditional drug trafficking statutes to an online telehealth business. We look forward to continuing this work in collaboration with our strike force partners. This collaboration will enable us to make good on the President's promise to protect the American taxpayer by going after individuals and entities that seek to cheat the system and to recover more money stolen from investors and the public. I'd now like to introduce U.S. Attorney Timothy Corshane from the District of Arizona.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Colin, for your leadership in this area. And I would also like to thank the Acting Attorney General, Todd Blanche, for dedicating the resources necessary to have this fight now. In defining the problem, theft of taxpayer money, whether it's in healthcare or any other arena, is more than just theft of some dollars. What it is it is targeting vulnerable victims, especially in the healthcare area, who have no other option. They don't have the independent knowledge to verify that what their doctor is telling them is true, that they actually need that wound care, they actually need that product, or that their lives will actually be better despite the kickback going back to whatever healthcare provider is telling them they really need this treatment. In Arizona, this problem has grown exponentially. In the District of Arizona, we have seen a vast population explosion. And that comes with vulnerable victims, including specifically our elderly population and our Medicaid-eligible families. Both of those populations have been targeted. As AAG McDonald pointed out, in the Gerke-Keene case, we had $1.2 billion in fraud targeting wound care and skin care victims. Now, they stole healthcare money, but they also victimized people who didn't need those procedures, who suffered through the pain and humiliation of those procedures, and then lost faith in the system. This problem is real, it's present, and it is now. But that moves to the solution. As part of the West Coast Healthcare Fraud Strike Force, Arizona and the United States Attorney's offices are uniquely positioned. We have the resources because we have the people. We have the right attorneys in the right place with the right local knowledge ready to address this problem on a national scale. The United States Attorney's Office in the District of Arizona, for example, has already this year in 2026 resolved cases through guilty pleas or sentencings worth several $100 million, and that's Medicaid fraud alone. The problem is real, it is there, and the United States Attorney's offices are already addressing it. And with the significant amount of resources that the Department of Justice is now pushing our way, we will be able to do even more. But, as AAG McDonald said, those wrongdoers, those fraudsters, have nowhere left to hide because our AUSAs and our professional staff are expert investigators, they are experienced trial lawyers, and they will find what you stole and get it back, not just for the government, but for the vulnerable victims who are due that benefit. Thank you very much, and I would next like to welcome up the First Assistant for the District of Nevada, Sagal Chada.
Good morning, everyone. Nevada is the 9th most fastest growing state in the nation. Part of that includes 40% of the population that is coming to Nevada is senior citizens. That makes Nevada particularly vulnerable to healthcare fraud. 1 out of every 5 Nevada residents has indicated mental health issues. We have a serious mental health crisis in Nevada, again, making our mental health communities vulnerable to fraud. Hospice fraud and behavioral health fraud are the 2 most prevalent types of fraud that exist in the healthcare industry in Nevada. What we have when we deal with fraud are 3 issues. It deals with patient neglect, false claims, and kickbacks. Just this past year in Nevada, we have secured indictments in the amount of $94 million for, again, amniotic wound allografts. The reality of what we are dealing with in Nevada is that we have to be part of this West Coast strike force. And again, thank you very much, Colin, for including us. Thank you. And I will turn it over back to Colin.
So we'll now open the floor to questions, and I will call on as many of you as I can, but please identify yourself by name, the outlet that you represent, and identify the presenter that the question is directed to. So any questions? Yes, ma'am.
News Springer with ABC7 here in San Francisco. What's the local implication here in the Bay Area of this?
Thank you for the question. Being what is the local implication for this development of the strike force team here in San Francisco? The implication is that where there are more agents and where there are more prosecutors, more fraud is discovered, more fraud is investigated, and more fraudsters are put in prison. That is the implication. Anyone in San Francisco who's currently defrauding the American taxpayer by virtue of cheating in their healthcare practices, they should be put on notice that the implication here by this effort that we are undertaking is that they are under the microscope more than ever before.
I'm just wondering, were any of those operations here locally in the Bay Area, anywhere in this region?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Were any of those operations, did any of those operations take place here?
The question was, have any of those operations taken place here? The answer is yes. There are historical cases as described by U.S. Attorney Missakian. There are many active investigations underway, and this new strike force will turbocharge those efforts to ensure that anyone considering defrauding the American taxpayer in San Francisco and beyond are held accountable. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. I have a question. I'm Christy Smith with NBC Bay Area News. I believe for Nevada, it was mentioned that hospice and behavioral health fraud were common. Is that also true for this area, for San Francisco, or what would you say the most common?
So the question was, what is the most common type of fraud that we are seeing in this area? To that, I would say that we are focused on the full field of fraud in San Francisco and elsewhere. We are building tools and relying on our data analytics in order to reveal the fraudsters and have that data point us to where the high spots of fraud are. That is why these districts in particular, on the heels of other districts that have already been identified. For instance, Los Angeles already has a strike force team, and we will be building on that strike force team. But things like hospices and other patient care types of schemes are schemes that we see that are prevalent, and we will be focusing on those types of schemes here and across the country.
Mike Lindy with Fox. Have you been in touch with reps from Oregon and Washington to possibly even expand this new task force, even though this has just been announced?
Thank you, sir. The question was whether we have been in touch with others in Oregon and Washington for the purpose of expanding this further. The answer is that we are expanding our reach within the fraud division across the entire country. We will be taking speedy steps towards putting prosecutors everywhere across the country. As I mentioned, we just this last week announced a $300 million grant program that would allow state and local prosecutors to join us in this effort. We invite them to come and join us. You can go to justice.gov/fraud. That's justice.gov/fraud to learn more information about that. And so, sir, to your question, Oregon and Washington are absolutely on the radar. They are absolutely under the microscope, and we will absolutely be putting more prosecutors, more agents, more data analysts in those places to root out fraudsters who are exploiting soft systems and soft protocols in those states.
Can you maybe elaborate on how this fraud is being committed? What are you guys noticing the most is happening out there?
It's pretty simple. People lie and they cheat. It's nothing new. There's nothing new under the sun. People say that they're providing a service that they are not providing. People say that they are billing for a certain provision of services that they did not provide. There's a range of conduct that goes into what fraud looks like, but at its essence, it's someone lying to their patients and to the government as to the work that they are engaged in. And our data analytics helps us know exactly who those people are, and we will be knocking on your door soon.
This question is for Matt. What specifically in San Francisco are you guys targeting when it comes to these type of frauds?
Thanks for the question. So as the United States Attorney's Office has mentioned here in Main Justice, we are going to take a full look at all healthcare fraud. So I don't want to get into specifics exactly breaking down the individual fraud components, but we take a look at all healthcare fraud. Task forces are nothing new to the FBI. We have our violent crime task forces, our safe streets task forces. This is just another step to include our partners here on the federal law enforcement side. So I'd say we're going to dive into every single component of fraud here to ensure that these entire organizations are taking a look at a whole. That's one thing our law enforcement partners do extraordinarily well is take a look at the entire enterprise, and that's what we're going to do.
Any other questions? All right, thank you all.